and get back to sharing the screen. We wanted to make sure we recorded, so I'm going to do that. So Amanda Visick created what they call the fun maps, and it was a small sample survey, and I think Tom could probably talk a little bit more on that, but I think it was less than 200 youth athletes and what they found enjoyable in sports. And so Tom, being a PhD in his nature, took this whole process and expanded it out and sent a new the survey directly to soccer participants. You can see the details here, 20 states, rec to elite, and tried to determine information about what players find enjoyable. And the reason this has implications for 7v7 and 9v9 coaching, we will hopefully tie together for you by the end of the presentation. What I want to do right now is I'm going to ask you guys to quickly take a poll. So I'm launching a poll here for you through Zoom. And hopefully you have a chance to fill out the questions. We'll give it about a minute or so. And Tom, you're just going to be my check for understanding. Tom,
I'm listening.
Is the poll
Pulls up?
Up. Everybody, okay, good. I just want to make sure that it's up there.
Working through it.
Excellent. Yeah, so it's interesting on this end. It's a new technology I'm working with, so I'm hopeful everybody sees what I think they see, but we're sort of making our way through this as best we can. So I see 2 of 25 have completed the poll. And we're up to 7. Technology is quite amazing, isn't it? There's 15 of 25. So we'll go about another 15 seconds. And I'm going to hit end poll here, and that will take that off of your screen, so then you don't have to worry about staring at that anymore. We're 22 of 25. End poll. Okay. So the reason I had everybody participate in the poll is to share with you and learn actually from you as well. What do the players say versus what do we think as coaches, and what are the implications of that for teaching? And so this data is tried and true. And as you can see, would players rather come to practice and participate? And clearly it is structured scrimmages. And I think the implication of that statement is oftentimes as coaches, when players say they want to do something fun, we immediately go to, well, let's get World Cup out. We'll take all the rules out, and no matter what we're doing, and what we'll do is just play unstructured. When actually given the opportunity in terms of choosing structured and unstructured, they actually choose structure, and we'll get into that. As you can see here, would you rather in practice participation in scrimmages for repetition's sake, or participate in scrimmages and activities with a way to win? And it's interesting because and even I remember coming through where in the coaching education world, where competition was almost not a dirty word, but we didn't want to stress score. We didn't want to make that a focal point. And I think what we've learned is that competition and finding ways to play to win are an important part of motivation for players. It's how we manage that in terms of teaching. Do we sell out ethics to win a game, or can we use some of these things about playing structured sports and giving players a way to win, whether it's a small activity or a game, really appeals to their motivation? Further on down the line, would you rather play when dealing with practices with time and space and the ability to make decisions, or be playing in spaces that aren't proportional? So in other words, we see, and I've seen this in grassroots level as an example, and all the way through the senior level, where you'll have a 5v5 game, even, and I'm talking with 7, 8 year olds, and they'll play 4v4, 5v5, and it'll be a 15-yard box. And the players have no time and no space to execute any sort of skill, to execute decision making. And so clearly players are saying the ability to, with time and space, and I think the implication there is players want to be able to make decisions. The next one, similarly, this is really key. I think when players lose possession, what typically coaches do is we stop the activity, and we've learned to stop the activity and address the mistake that led to the loss of possession, for example. And players clearly tell you, and if anybody who's played the game would like to know, well, what happens next is the most important play. And oftentimes, when you talk about soccer, the most important play after losing the ball is transitioning to try and win it back. But as coaches, sometimes I think we are taught, and I think that's an expectation of the parents, show me you're coaching my kid hard. So when they make a mistake, I want you to stop them. And I've actually witnessed where a coach, a young coach, learning how to be more observant, try and coach within the flow of the game. A parent actually got up off their chair at a practice and started barking at the coach, because they weren't coaching enough, which is unfortunate. Positive coaching. Would you prefer that, and this is about micromanagement here, right? So do we want to joystick a player or allow them to make their own decisions? And that's a pretty clear cut. Anybody that's played a sport, think about it in your own work. Do you want to work for a micromanager, or do you want somebody that guides you, gives you feedback, and allows you to do your thing? This one clearly is about teaching the game. And it's similar to micromanaging, but I think the implication here with the big green area is about teaching and understanding the game, reading the cues in the game, helping the player make sense of that, so the player can go back and make their own decision effectively. This is a really key when we talk about playing the game and wanting to be good in the game on the weekend. If you want players to be effective in a game, you have to teach them about the game. Last couple, again, do you want to be criticized for making a mistake or encouraged to make? Understanding mistakes are part of learning. I think we all understand that, but again, the pressure to highlight and spotlight mistakes and say, here's what you've done wrong, is where the line gets blurred. So I think it's important that we keep in mind, this is what players and youth athletes are telling us is enjoyable about sport. They want to learn, they want the challenge. It's how we go about it. They're telling us and giving us good information. This one is about stopping activities. Again, again, I've seen a lot of coaches, I do this around the country, and a lot of coaches who are constantly intervening and giving information, and it's information overload, and sometimes that information is lost on the players. Again, you talk too much, players start to tune you out. Clearly the players are saying they want the information through the flow of the game, but allow them to play the game. Last couple, clearly players would prefer to be playing a game and learning by playing than they do by sitting. That's a no-brainer. This one is really interesting to me. Technical development, we'll get into technique and skill here in a minute, but technical development, it's interesting that the players have identified that it is their responsibility to practice at home to refine technique. And this really leads into the history of coaching is where do we teach technique? How much technique do we want to teach in a training session? And at the 7v7 9v9 level, we're assuming that you might have kids for an hour and a half, 2 times a week, maybe, right? So how much time do you want to spend on technique, and how much time do players think that they could do in terms of homework or on their own? I will jump off here for a second, just to make the point, and anybody that knows any professional players or players that have advanced significantly in their career, and I believe if somebody did a data study, I would bet about 100% of pro players would tell you that they refined their craft on their own, that it was time spent away from structured training is where they perfected technique. Not time spent in the team training setting is where they perfected technique. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to pause for about, I'm just going to pause and open it up if anybody has any questions about the data here from feedback from players. All right. Well, hopefully it's clear. So what I do want to do is invite people here to join the discussion. And so I will take a pause here. I want people to join in on this statement. No technique, no tactics, because it's an interesting discussion point as we get into the 7v7 and 9v9 model and positional play. Maybe Graham, if you want to jump in, what's your thoughts on that?
Am I unmuted? Can everybody hear me?
Yep, you're on.
I think you should show somebody how to do a technique, and then from there, they then go away and practice it. But I think you can refine technique at the beginning of practice, and you can make technique fun. I can only speak from my own experience as a player. Being shown how to do certain techniques when I was younger, and then gone away and practiced them. And that again, as I got older and going to Man United, the Cliffs, working with some of their players, showing me a move, then you go away and do it. But I wouldn't have been able to. And I remember, Tom, you showed me on a license course once how to do the Cruyff turn, where the left foot has to be slightly open, so that your body can pivot easily. So I think, again, when you see that, the kids can go away and do it correctly as opposed to incorrectly.
Excellent. That's a good point. And I think Graham's alluding a little bit to the discussion nationally is, and I think there's a discussion in here too, is how much time do we want to allot to technical training versus skill training versus teaching players positional concepts in a team format. And Robert chimed in the chat. I agree. If you can't drive a car, you can't think of winning a car race. And I think those are important points. I think the one of the underpinnings of the conversation about technique and tactics is at this level 7v7 9v9, what we see are coaches who now tilt the scales heavily in, we're going to train technique, and now Graham talked about at the introduction at the beginning of a practice, show me how to do it, I'll go away and do it. Now what happens if we take that technique and this becomes the primary focus of training? And we see this model of, we'll spend 30 minutes on technique, we'll do some sort of related activity, and then the kids are clamoring, coach, when are we going to play? When are we going to play? And yes, just because kids have said they'd rather play than do drills with no way of winning, my kids want to eat pizza every night, doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen. But I think in there's really good information about what the balance is and what the implications are. So the next slide is one that I think is really sort of getting to the heart of the conversation. You'll see here there are 3 activities. There is a technique activity, which might be considered a passing pattern. Player passes the ball to a player standing. Player then lays the ball off, passes around, so on and so forth. Yes, there's movement. The players pop off the cones. Yes, they have to receive. Yes, they have to play. But the reason that this becomes teaching technique is because everything is predictable. If you continue to train predictable movements and behaviors, you'll get very good at predictable movements and behaviors. The difference is that not all soccer is predictable movements and behaviors. So technique, by some version of a definition, is to be able to execute something repetitively, eliminating variables. Skill, however, is the ability to apply technique given game variables. Those variables might be opponents, boundaries, referee, weather, all sorts of variables that impact your ability to execute a technique. So the center game now is about skill. What this game is you've got a player in white on one end, a player in white on another end. They can't leave their half of the field. The others are 2v2, and the way they score, the team in red, if they get this ball here, they play it across to the other white player and get it back, they get a point. Why is this reinforced skill? Because now this player has to open their body up, dealing with the pressure of the player in yellow. Do they get their head up? Do they open their hips? What kind of pace do they play the ball in here to beat the defender? What is the movement now of this player in relation to the ball, and how do they prepare to receive it? Do they have to dribble out of pressure to keep possession? So this now becomes a game of skill, technique, but in the context of all the game variables. Finally, you've got positional awareness, where now we're talking about a more game realistic type activity. While this game isn't necessarily 7v7, 9v9, you can still teach the concepts of the two players in red here are defenders. These players might be midfield players in red. This player up here might be the forward for red. And now we start to define, hey, when the ball's here, here's what I want you guys to do. When the ball's here, here's what I want you two to do, and so on. Now you're talking about positions within a game. And hopefully you see the difference. What I'm going to do is pause here and allow any questions about the difference in these three activities. No questions. Okay. Well, either I'm doing a great job or we got a quiet group. Yep, go ahead.
So my question would be, so are you saying that, just to clarify to everybody, are you saying that that technique, skill, and positional play should all be included in a practice?
So it's a great question, and I think that it is not necessary to predetermine that these have to be placed in each practice, or this is a natural progression. You go technique, skill, and position. I think the question to ask each coach is, what are the implications if you spend too much time in technique and then you spend a lot of time in a skill and now you don't teach positional? Or is there time where technique isn't part of a session on a day and it's a skill game related to concepts of opening your body up, getting your vision forward to play across the line to score a point, then into positional play? I think it's up to the coach to determine what is the player's needs and what are their abilities. If you have a novice group where you're going to have to spend a little bit more time on, I think, showing technique, here is a technique, then do you assign homework? Hey, can you go away and practice this technique on your own so we can spend more time in here? But if you go back to the fun mapping, which was up in the previous part, we talked about players want to play games where they are learning about the game. And I think Tom had a saying, and this was probably 2 years ago, when he was talking about, playing games. If we want to get better at playing the game on Saturday, then we're going to have to spend time practicing playing the game through the week. So there was a comment that came out, I think this was Tom's. Perhaps what we have to ask ourselves is why or don't spend time coaching players about the game. So again, I think it's about trade-offs. when we spend time in technique, where are we giving up teaching the game in other areas? So Graham, does that get a little bit of the heart of what you were asking?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. I think that one of the things, yep, go ahead.
And in fairness to Graham, for those of you who don't know Graham, he would be the best player on the field if we got on the field today. But it's also, but that's, I think it's also true that there's somewhere along the line there's a balance. And I think through the coaching education programs, my own included, we weren't trained enough in understanding how the game works and how to look at the game and train the game. And so we tend to shy away from maximizing what benefits we can get from more coaching in games that are designed to teach players about positional play, simply because, and I'm going to speak again just my own, and you can agree, disagree, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. I coached that. So it became something I learned much later rather than something that was, it should have been earlier, but it wasn't. So anyway.
Actually, I think I'll be done in about 5 anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think to talk, we want to spend the good last half of this activity dealing with the positional play piece, and it's going to be a largely interactive with field diagrams. So I want to get through this part very quickly. So when we talk about positional games, you know, to teach position, when we think things are game oriented, we do have to think about the game and the elements of the game. What makes it the game? So the game played between two goals, it has a direction. You attack defend a side, attack a side. Now we're talking about the moments of the game. So we talked about, does the game have attacking, transition to defending, defending, transition to attacking, the shape of the game. So when we talk about specific positions, yes, the game probably is going to be a rectangle. Can that be altered to create more width or length? Sure. But I think as the game, if we want to teach the positional game, then these kind of facets don't have to be, they are generally included to teach soccer. Okay. We talked about the 4 moments of the game. Let's very quickly, before we get into diagrams, because I think the diagrams is where people want to spend the meat of the time. And to Tom's point, one of the things that I've learned doing coaching courses around the country for the past 18 months is that we don't spend enough collective time understanding roles and responsibilities and players and what we want the game to look like. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the difference. And this is not here's what you have to define things as, but I think it's more about, just for the purpose of this activity, there is a difference between the definition of formation and system of play. So formation is simply the way you arrange players on the field. So if you are a supporter of a certain team and they play 1-4-3-3, 1 goalkeeper, 4 defenders, 3 midfielders, 3 forwards, it's a basic formation. And the difference is that system of play is the positions that players play in the different moments of the game. So if you look here, when we have the ball, teams might play differently when they have the ball. So if we're talking 11-a-side, for example, instead of playing a 1-4-3-3, perhaps both outside defenders go forward. So now it's a 1-2 defenders, but now they have 5 midfielders and 3 forwards. So system of play simply is the difference between the initial formation and then how the teams play. So what we want to do here is open it up, and maybe Jason Rutkowski, if you're still on, Jason, if you want to unmute yourself, let's talk about a 7v7. How might you want to arrange the players on the field in a formation, given the fact that we've already placed the goalkeeper?
Sure, I would have 2 defenders. I'll play 3, 2 forwards.
Can you go back and do that a little more slowly while I put players on the field?
Yeah, 3 mids.
And is that a central left and right?
Yes, sir. Yep.
So maybe we'll go with a 6 as a center midfielder. A wide left. Wide right. And so excellent, Jason. So if we look at these questions on the right-hand side, and Jason, do you guys use positional numbers?
We do, yeah, a 9, and yep.
And so what does the positional number do for the players that you're working with?
For us, it understands the roles that they're placed in, whether they're 9 or they're 10, that they have more freedom to roam in the attack.
Sure. And I think that, and we're not advocating that you have to use positional numbers, but what we used to have is positional names. This just simplifies, and I think Jason's comment, the 9 is the forward. So when anybody that he's working with says he's going to go play the 9, then that player has a role of going and being the forward of the team, and then certain positional responsibilities within that. So Jason, just to continue on with this, if you see these other questions that follow, within the formation that you've put on the field for a 7v7, for example, who are the players that you would say are the ones that are responsible for providing width to the game?
Yeah, for 7v7, I would have my width come from my 7 and 11.
Okay, so these players out here. And in terms of depth, who is the players, or which players provide depth for your team?
Yeah, so I would have the 6 would be actually a deeper lying center midfielder. Then I would play with the false 9. I would have
Okay.
more freedom to come back in the midfield and get the ball.
Okay. So when we talk about depth, and we're talking about front to back and back to front. And I think Jason's talking about bringing this player deeper in the midfield to create space. Let's pause here for a minute, and I think Tom brought up a good question. Let's talk about team shape. Team shape. Does anybody want to jump in on what they think the definition of team shape might be? Because we hear this term thrown out a lot. Find your shape, get your shape. And I right now don't have a list of who's on the call. Jerry Shutway, I see you're on the call. Hi, Jerry. You want to unmute and give us a sense of what team shape might mean to you?
Well, it all depends on the situation at hand. If your team is attacking, like you were alluding to earlier, how does your team provide width and depth to create space? If your team is defending, how does it pressure the ball? Does it give a high pressure or does it give low pressure? Your players on the field have to adjust their position according to where the ball is and how much pressure you want to put on the ball.
Excellent. I like that, Jerry. It's a good way to describe it. So team shape might be the positions that you expect players to be in relative to where the ball is. And I think Jerry did a good job of saying, well, this could happen both offensively and defensively. And we're certainly going to jump into both sides of the ball here when we get a little bit further along. But the positions of the players relative to the ball. So for example, and you can see the ball here in white, if we're talking about the moment of attacking, what are the positions when the goalkeeper has the ball that you want your players to take would be the team shape that you see. Now, this is interesting because we talk about training, and we talked about in that diagram between technique games, skill games, and positional understanding games. This is where that check for understanding comes in. We oftentimes will play the game. Our players won't be doing what we think, but how much time have we spent training them in game situations and what we think the shape should be, and how do we teach them that? So it's an interesting jumping off point. So thank you guys for contributing in this. So now we're going to progress to this slide, and I'm going to leave it open. And if anybody would like to jump in on what they think their definition of style of play is and why it might be relevant for the conversation here.
Hi, Brad. Max from North Olmsted. I feel like style of play is kind of makes players think of the way they want to play with the ball or without the ball. So if you want to be a possession-based team, you're probably going to play a 2-3-1 where you're going to try to keep the ball, include flank players, get in behind. But then not every team can be Barcelona. So do you know what I'm saying? Like, every team doesn't need to play that way just because we think, oh, possession soccer. That's not the only way to win soccer games. and I'm not saying it's the right way or it's the wrong way. It's just people have different styles. So if you look at like Julian Nagelsmann or Klopp, they're trying to get in behind, kind of repress, things like that. So each style has a like advantages and disadvantages, and it's finding which one your kids best fit. So like the way that we coach our kids, we're trying to get the ball into the final third as quickly as we can. And because we realize that we're probably not going to have the most technical players all the time. So we're just trying to win the ball. And then if we lose the ball there, we're trying to repress as quickly as we can to win it back.
Excellent, Max. I really appreciate you taking the opportunity to contribute. I think Max is really on to something when he talks about, obviously Barcelona and the way to possess a ball, for example. I think for the purpose of this is style of play is a couple of different things. Style of play can be defined, can come to a coach in a lot of different ways. It can be prescribed to you by the club setting. It can be, as Max talked about, hey, here are the players we have in front of me this season. That's going to help define the style of play. Or it could be very coach driven. Every coach has a personality, and if the coach has a particular personality and sees the game in a certain way. What I think is so vital in style of play as it relates to this topic and why this is in here is the only way we can teach positional play is if we know in our mind's eye what we think the game should look like in the different moments. So in attacking, in defending, and then we'll break it down even further. So style of play, this picture of the game in your own mind, okay? Now I have a picture in my own mind. Now we need to talk about how do I want that actually to unfold? Because just having the picture doesn't translate into what the player actions, how do you want the players to perform? So this slide it's an interesting one because it is a blend of the old and the new. And what I mean by old coaching education, the attacking principles, penetrate, support, width, depth. Now the coaching education is a little bit different. U.S. Soccer uses the phrase team tactical principles, and they're a little bit more detailed, although the details still fit very nicely into these headings here on the right. What they do talk about, though, that I really like, team tactical principles, is that we break things up into constants. So every soccer team, and Max said it very clearly, our job when we have the ball is to get the ball forward and score goals. That's the same whether you're Barcelona, whether you're in North Olmsted with U10, whether you're in Worcester with U12, whether you're in Toledo with U11, it doesn't matter. When everybody's got the ball, this is what they're trying to do. The difference becomes your style of play. How do you see the game? And then how do you teach the players, and who does these jobs? The penetrate, support, the width, create depth. And that's really the difference. And if we go back again to the slide with the technique activity, the skill activity, and the positional game, again, if we're trying to imprint a style of play and we've got player jobs that create support and width and depth, and how are we going to penetrate and when, we haven't even talked about the when of all of these. This has to come in things that look like a soccer game. And that's the best way to teach it. Not the only way, but the best way to teach it. So when we talk about style of play and the team tactical principles. So organizing an attack. And this is where I need your help as the group to talk us through this. And before we get into that, we're just going to very quickly show this slide. When organizing in 7B7 or 9B9, when you're talking about organizing an attack, we're talking about how we're going to do things over on the right side. We can now break that down. Are we teaching players how to do it in our defensive third of the field when we have the ball? Or are we talking about what our team does? What's the shape? What are the roles when we have it in our defending half? Or do you want to make it more specific and deal with the middle third, attacking half, or specifically in the attacking third? There's a lot of variables that could play into your decision, but what it is, it's your decision as a coach. What do you want to focus on? Is it the more granular, the thirds? Is it more dialed out into halves? And that could be your experience. It could be the player's ability, player's experiences. So a lot can play into that. I think the long and the short of it is, this is a decision that you have to make when training. where are you situate? What is the situation you're trying to improve? So here we go. This is what everybody hopefully gets excited about, is talking about the game. So let me see who we're going to pick here. Corey Reinert, I see you're on. If you want to unmute yourself, Corey. One of our friends from Northeast Ohio. Corey, if you could you talk me through, and let's talk a little bit about positional roles when the red team here is building up from the goalkeeper, and just tell me, this is a 9v9, Corey, we'll make it a 9v9.
Okay.
So you want to talk me through placing of players on the field?
As a starting position, or
Yep,
to the
goalkeeper has the ball.
Goalkeeper has the ball. Probably have your 4 and 5s wide on the box for the play out. Yep. 6 probably right at the transition line you have there. Maybe we're slightly in between, a little bit lower maybe. Yeah. Then you can have your, so we're doing 9v9. 7 and 11's probably a little bit wider and slightly higher than the 6. Numbers also might need probably at 8, maybe staggered somewhere in between the 7 and 11. And then we need a 9 in there, probably right at the top, staggered up a little bit. Yeah, right up down there, maybe a little bit lower. So it's 1, 2.
I think you're missing a player or two.
So maybe a 10. Maybe if we're playing maybe a 3-4-1, or yeah, somewhere around there. Maybe slightly. Yep. That's good.
Okay, so the question for Corey, and again, we're not. This is what the great thing about soccer is, that everybody sees the game differently. So even 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 players. Some people choose 3 in the back. Corey's chosen 2 in the back. That's no problem. This is an important piece of the game. Again, it's style of play. It's how you envision the game unfolding, and I really like this. So Corey, the next question is, now that we're building from the back, these questions on the right-hand side of the page, who do you believe provides your width and your depth? Can you be specific as to the players and what their jobs are?
Your 7-11 will be give you the most width.
Okay.
Depth, 9 going forward. Your 4 and 5 would be, providing depth for play out. Obviously, your goalkeeper is always an option for depth. And then if you're looking, so 6 can also drop deeper on a transition, depending on how the attacking team is.
And Corey, so good job so far. Where do you want this ball played?
Well, that's
Let's
also
assume the goalkeeper has the ball.
Yep, that's going to also depend on the positioning of the opposition. But typically, if you're going to play, you got depending on where the opposition is, your 4, your 5, your 6. Yep.
You want to hear?
Yep. Yeah, we'll go there.
Excellent. And so now again, so we talk about, yes, this was a starting shape that Corey came. This is how he would ask his team in the moment when the goalkeeper has the ball. The implication of all of this, if we go back again, is just reminding, when do we teach the players that in the game, when the goalkeeper has the ball, this is the way we want our players arranged? And this is important because we have to teach this. And then Corey says, okay, anticipated, we like to see if we can build the ball out of the back, then what happens next? What are the jobs of the different players? What are the roles here? Corey, could you talk us through quickly?
Um, well, if I were to go with my guys, I would probably say your 7's going to probably stretch up, create a little bit more depth. 10's probably going to come in, play inside the space. Yep, there. There's going to be a little bit more flow from your 6 as well, probably coming in slightly and dropping. To provide option.
Okay. And so, and this is an interesting point because this speaks to, and I think Corey's done a good job. He's talking about this player being able to be mobile to provide width on this side. And this is pretty interesting too, because what happens is we talk about what happens immediately around the ball. And as coaches, oftentimes our eye really gets caught right here. What is this player doing? What is the decision of this player? Are they facing the right way? Are they getting their head up? Are they looking here? Interestingly enough, though, we have to be mindful of what's happening over here. What is this player doing to assist? Is the goalkeeper providing deep support behind? Is this player stretching the game here? And this all is dependent on your style of play, what you see. It's interesting, and I'd like to just, Max, if you could jump in here, because you made the statement that your teams typically play a little bit more vertically. And you said that's based on the sort of the skill level of the kids. So would your shape look different than this?
So we would play 3-2-3.
Okay, so talk me through that.
So we would actually, the way that we did our numbers was 3, 4, and 5 across the back, a 6 and an 8 in the middle, 11, 7 out wide, and a 9 up front.
So this would look like this.
Yeah, there wouldn't be a 10 because we wheeled out across all of our boys side that at 7v7 you can either play 2-3-1 or 3-2-1. So we gave them 2 formations, 2 different styles of play for the coaches to decide, because again at North Olmsted we have 8 or 9 travel teams that I oversee as the travel coordinator and director of coaches. So I can't coach all the teams. So we gave all the coaches the information that we want a style of play. So this is our style. This is how we want to progress from U8 to U15 and the style of play that we want. So we would go 3-2-3. So say that we would play the rights with a 3. We would look for an immediate line into the 9 where he could lay off to the 7 and the 6 supporting it. So he would look for an immediate ball in. So we would have a little diamond between the 6, 7, 3, and 9. And we
would look more like that.
Yep. Okay. And we would look for an immediate ball into the 9 who would be posted up on the last defender. So if we play a ball in 7, 6 support, so then they can face the field, because 9 would lay it off, and then 6 and 7 can face the field and run at their back line rather than just hoiking it. If the 9 isn't on, we'd look to play between the 6 and the 7 through the middle, trying to have different movements. Either the 7 checks away and comes 2 and offers for the 3, or the 6 just comes and supports and bumps it out wide to the 7, and then we get faced up. The number one thing that we're trying to do is get faced up towards the goal as quickly as we can so we can run at players. And then if that's not on, we'll play the 4 and go out the other way. So our immediate line, our first progression is looking as forward as we can and then playing off and slower and slower. So we don't want to just play possession to play possession.
Sure.
Because again, we recognize that not many of our kids play club, and we're not going to be able to compete with other cities just because of the financial reasons and the other reasons, that like the culture and things like that. But we're trying to get the ball to our forwards, lay it off, and then go from there and play the way we face.
Sure. And I think it's an interesting conversation. And this is where, we could, I think anybody that's involved in the game of soccer would love to sit and do this for hours on end. So the interesting thing, and Tom just sent a message on it, was interesting because if and when we connect more passes in one area of the field, the ball is always a magnet, and that creates and draws defenders. And so it's an interesting thing. Do we talk about, as we connect more passes on one side, typically defenders are drawn to that side. To your point, you want to create opportunities for players to face, because the constant of all of this is we want to go here. And so by getting and maybe playing away from pressure is an opportunity. That doesn't mean it's easy to teach, but it's one of those things where if we go back and to that point with Max, and I love it, if we go all the way back here, we can teach in a skill game how players can see that pathways to target players aren't available, and that maybe playing across to go forward is an option. So that's not positional awareness, but it is game awareness. So this isn't assigning that this is a 6 or an 8 as much as it would in this game, but it is teaching them, can you see a forward pass? If it's not on, can we dribble or pass some way that we can get forward? And so it's an interesting point where style and now how this comes into coaching attacking
Right.
soccer comes into
And
play.
and I played Division 1 soccer at Detroit Mercy, so like, and I was the 6 actually, so like I was supposed to get on the ball, try and dictate the game. And like as a player, I always wanted to keep the ball, go side, like try and keep the ball just to keep the ball. And that's kind of how I was raised and like grew up as a player. But then like as a coach, I'm just like, I don't know if I want my players in that situation to make those decisions. Like I trust them to make the decisions because that's why we go through the first line progression, second line progression, and third. But then like as a player, like as a coach, it's completely different. And I'm just like, why are we wasting time in the back when we can get the ball forward and run at players and be dangerous?
Sure, and I think that's something that, and to Max's point, and I understand what you're saying. I think it's interesting because Tom and I have talked about this quite a bit. Is that in the soccer landscape, whether or not we, let's assume that maybe our experience as coaches isn't as detailed as what maybe Max and Corey has come in, and maybe our thought process is our experience level says, well, guys, the idea is to get the ball from here to here. And sometimes the easiest way to do that with the least amount of risk is to go there. And that's a decision that you have to make. I think one of the things that I would always ask, everything has a consequence to it, as Corey will know from working in a coaching course with me, working through a coaching course with me, is that even as less experienced coaches, if we choose the route of least resistance, the opportunities for these players to learn about positions, to refine their skill, which is their ability to execute techniques in the context of the game. We now talk about teams becoming and players developing more when they don't have the ball than when they have the ball. And really, is that an important piece of the puzzle here, is how we develop with the ball. So there's a question up on the chat room, and it's, let's see, Beth sent it, as a newer coach, how do you show your new 9 players this in practice? How would you break it down during practice going? That's an excellent question. And I think Tom's got a presentation that he's sharing to everyone about how to do that. I think a hint into what that's talking about, because this is complicated, right? There's a lot of players. Who has 9, and you're probably going to play with 9 players on the other side. You're going to play with 18. How many of you have 18 players in a full space to teach all of these things? So now the question becomes, can you teach the concepts in smaller numbers? And the reality of it, it's Tom's comment, it's not easy. And there's a slide here in the end, which we get into that, how you might do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump forward just in the, for expedience of time, is going through defending. And I'm going to tell you, this is an interesting piece because, again, in my experience in the past 18 months, this is an area of the game where I think coaches, and I totally understand why you would spend more time at 77 and 99. What players do with the ball and in possession of the ball, I believe, is of greater importance than what they do without the ball. However, I think there are ways that we can teach kids how to play without the ball that helps them understand the concepts, that it's not just run and pressure, everybody run and pressure as fast as you can and win it back. There are same organization that you have in the attack as is in defending. So I'm going to open it up here. You can see sort of to Beth's point, instead of playing 77 or 99, this is a 5v5 activity. And we're dealing with the red team defending. The question is, somebody wants to jump in here, organize your 4 field players and how you want them to play without the ball, assuming the opposing goalkeeper has it.
I'll take it,
Who's the-
Brad.
Yep, go ahead.
I would put 2 in the back. So 2 for 1 in the back to always have a spare player. I'd have 1 player not man marking, but almost man marking the 8. And then the other player splitting between the 4 and the 5. And then just making it predictable. So if this goalie would play the 4, the 9 would step up and cut off the goalie.
So this is a great, Max, and you're going to have you continue to talk through this. So again, these are 2 even teams. So we've chosen a 5 versus 5, and both formations look very much the same, and even the system. So 2 defenders, 1 midfielder, 1 forward, 2 defenders, 1 midfielder, 1 forward, 1 goalkeeper, 1 goalkeeper. We don't want to leave the goalkeepers out of the conversation. And so now we talk about positional roles and responsibilities again. The concept is that the forward has a job, the midfielder has the job, the defenders have a job. This isn't 7v7 or 9v9, but now we're teaching the concepts of saying, okay, the 9 has a job here. The job is to deny or shepherd or bring the ball into a certain area. So Max is saying he wants the 4. If I'm understanding what you're saying, Mac, you want the 4 to go forward here.
To enter, right?
Yep. So now we're saying this is the objective. We want red's job, 9's job is this. We want blue to bring the ball into this area of the field. And Max, you want to talk us through what the other roles are now that we've identified the 9 has a job?
So by the 9 sliding across, he cuts the goalie and the 5 out of place. So now it's just 4v3 and 5v3 if you include our goalkeeper into the space.
Okay.
So we can have the 4 enter, the 9 keeps pressing, and then the 5 would eventually release, the 4 would slide across onto the 9, the 8 would stay with the 8, and then you would have a pressure pocket, almost like a pressing trap, that 9 and the 5 would condense in a 2v1, hopefully win the ball, and then we would counter from there.
So, and I think what Max is saying is basically once we've eliminated these players, we now have a numerical advantage in this part of the field. I think where we run into a little bit of problem, and this is an open question for anybody on the call, is because Max has said, well, the 9 is going to take the 4, that's his job or her job, to bring the ball here. What if, because now we are 1, 2, 3 versus 1, if we're looking at this in the third of a field, what are we going to do if this ball, if this ball does get played over here, because this player supports in a way that now the 9 cannot take away everybody. And now let's take this one step further. If I can do this. Love it. The ball ends up over here. And we were over here. So the question to the group, now what? Because we have to talk about, and one of the things I learned from one of the instructors I had the chance to work with, his comment was, what if? What if? And what if this happens? Who gets assigned to deal with the ball over here? And anybody else want to take a stab at how they might see in their style of play, in their mind's eye, what the solution is for this situation? Josh, you want to give it a go?
Yeah, if it was based on personnel from me, I would probably let that player maybe take a touch or 2 forward, keep them wide, and allow my 4 to slide up for pressure. Because if I took that player out from the middle of the field, to me, if somebody, God forbid, that player gets beat, and all of a sudden I could possibly give numbers up. But if I invite 4, I'm still allowing my 5 to slide into the middle a little bit more in the back, stay in goal side. I've got that player in the middle marked, and then my 9 that I had up top can always track back as an outside wing player on the left if that outside, back for the other team was to make a run up. So I'd have everybody at least picked up and marked. So defensively, I'd probably look something similar to that, because then everybody would be picked up and we would have everything covered and behind us. And if we were able to win that ball, we could have out of our 3, if my 4 wins it, my 9 can get back up into the attack, and then I could possibly have that 8 also help in the attack as well.
So it's an interesting conversation. Again, when we get into these things, the team tactical principles or the principles of play, in other words, how you want to play the game, what is in your mind's eye, this is the level of detail you can get into. Whether the 4 steps to the 5, other potential solutions in here might include the 4 and the 5 staying. Maybe it's the 8's job to slide in there. Oops. And the 9's job is to recover back in the middle. These are just different ways to teach it. But I think the important piece of the puzzle, if we're tying the theme of this whole activity together, is that I don't have 7v7 or 9v9 in training, but I can teach the concept of trying to maintain the shape of our back line when the opposing team switches the ball into the middle third. So now I'm starting to look at the role of the central midfielder, right? Do I want to take these players and leave the position? Do I want to make the center midfielder step out? Again, it's up to style of play and how you choose to do it. There's no right or wrong, but these are the implications for this when you get into this. When we get into the teaching of this, there's a lot of things to keep in mind. And one of the things that's been a really positive development from U.S. soccer coaching education, and this is hard to do, but I think it's important to keep in mind, is we have to manage players on both sides of the ball to make this as accurately as we can reflect a real game situation. Again, this isn't 7v7, 9v9, but if I can get the blue players to do that, I can help my red players understand this. That's a tall order. It's not an easy thing to do. But if you're mindful of it, I think you'll find that your eye will leave the ball more and start to watch what's happening without the ball. What are the roles of the players that you want to see happen? Do you want the 4 to step, or do you want the 8 to go out? You'll start to see these things and be able to help your players understand it. When we went back to the original survey, one of the things that was really important, and this is where I want to talk about a little bit here, is how do we teach these, if the 8 or the 4? Do we shout as a coach in a game or in a practice, who's got the ball? Who's pressuring the ball? Or do we say, do we recreate this situation and now start to say, when this happens, here is an option that we can use. Here's the job. Here's the role of the, here's the responsibility. When the 8 slides over, the 4 and the 5 slide across, we want to be a balanced team. We want to make sure that we're not allowing we're going to outnumber players on this side of the field. I think Max made that point. We're talking them and showing them the situations here, as opposed to shouting and saying, press the ball, or who's going to pressure there. We give them guidance based on, and we go all the way back up to the very beginning in the survey, the guidance of, hey, this is what this situation looks like. When the ball, when this happens, here are some solutions. Here's a solution here. Our 8's going to step. Our 4 and 5 are going to slide, and we're going to make sure that the 9 comes back in. And look, we've made it very difficult for blue to score on us, which is the objective. So these are the things that we are talking about. Right now, we're 5 after 5. I'm going to open up here for questions. And if Tom, you want to jump in and say a few words as well, this would be a good time to jump in and do that.
I'll just leave it open in case anybody's got some questions, and then just one last thought from me, Brad.
Okay. So this is the time for questions from anybody in the who's listening in with us.
Well, Brad, this is Jerry Shotway again. I don't necessarily have a question, but just a general comment. Regardless of what age and what level of play your players are at, most of what we do as coaches is inspire players to be creative, to think on their own and be independent thinkers to solve problems. So if we're trying to teach tactics, if we're trying to teach them how to handle specific situations, generally you want to ask questions of them. You pose a situation and you ask them questions on how they would solve that. And does it make sense collectively? Is their idea going to work? And that helps them buy into what you're trying to get out of them, so that it becomes they take ownership of it, in other words. And that way you get buy-in. You get much more aggressive buy-in.
Yeah, Jerry, that's an outstanding point. I don't, you can't overstate the importance of that. And I think what Jerry's talking about is the difference between telling the players, hey, when this happens, 8, you go there, 4, you stand here, 5, you stand here, versus engaging the players in how they see, what do they see as potential solutions, and working with them. And that it's a skill. It's much like players understanding skill. It takes time to learn, and the skill of a coach of being able to ask guided questions to solicit solutions from players. It is a challenging one, but a really valuable one. The other piece of the puzzle that's important, and I think Jerry's talking about, is being able to help the players through those guided questions to understand the cue. When the opponent has broken pressure by switching play, what do you see as a solution that keeps our back line intact? So it's tying the action, the 8 stepping out, with the solution of, or with the cue of, this has happened. And then the skill of the coach even further, I think Jerry was alluding to, is you got to be able to create this moment where perhaps the 4 plays to the keeper, who plays out to the 5, and they've broken pressure. Now that requires ability to work with the 4, 5, the 1, the 8, and the 9 of blue, not just the red. So that's an excellent comment, Jerry. Thank you. Anybody else?
Brad, I have a couple of questions that I'd like to know if they're being discussed at the national level. And I go back to England twice a year, and I take my son, who's now a 7-year-old, and I go to the feeder system to United, and we're invited into there. Couple of things. The age is always done by school year, so it's always September the 1st. So there's no barrier to entry, because the kids want to play with their kids in their school year. So I didn't know if that was being discussed at the national level anymore. But the other thing that is that at the U9 level, they still, well, for the U7 and U8s, they play 5-on-5. And that enables not as big a jump then to go from 4-on-4, no goalkeepers, to 7-on-7. And the other thing that they do is, with the size of the ball, at the U9 level, they still play with a size 3 ball, and they don't go until the U10s. And with me being around all these young kids at grassroots level, it's massive. I mean, I've got a daughter that's December birth date, and she'll end up having to play with all her friends, or won't be able to play with all her friends. And so I wanted to find out if that was really being discussed, and just the fact of ball size. It makes a massive difference, and they don't go to size 5 until U15. And the last one on 7-on-7, right? Is it being discussed about how you might do a corner kick, obviously with a heading situation? So I was just curious as to what the questions are out there, or is that being discussed at a national level?
So I appreciate the insight from the different experience. And I think that, I know Tom will probably have a few more things to add on to that. I can tell you that with the shakeup going on currently at US Soccer, I would believe that age group versus birth year is going to have probably as much positive momentum as it's had since we've changed to birth year. And what will happen with that, I don't know, but things are changing so fast at US Soccer. It's needed. So for that, that's where we are. In terms of ball size, I have not heard that discussion. Now, Tom may have a different one, but I do think that, and you know, Graham, you can certainly appreciate this, is when your grassroots players or your 7, 8-year-old players or 9-year-old players are playing here in a typical spring where there's no global pandemic. Oftentimes we go out and watch games where the grass it's too wet, so the grass hasn't been cut. That it's almost as if the fields impact that as much as the size of the ball, where the ball doesn't roll. And players trying to kick a ball or dribble a ball is really impacted significantly by grass as much as anything else, that contribute or compound that with the size of the ball. But I have not heard conversations about the ball size coming in for, which would basically push the 5 up, the 4 up, and then the 3 up. And Tom, you can feel free to jump in on that.
Yeah, France has the same issue with the size 5 doesn't come in till later. At least on the girls' side, I'm not quite sure of the boys, but I would suspect since the girls grow earlier and they're using a 4, that might not be unreasonable for the boys as well. Belgium is a country that plays 2 aside and then goes to 5 aside. So I totally agree with you that our U8s and U9s would be far better off. And actually, Beth sent me a note, just, you know, she's got younger kids, and this transition from 4v4 to 77 is enormous, which I think is what you're alluding to. We would be better off going to 5v5 at U8 and U9. So the federation got dumped with the PDIs, and there is definitely conversations about how to adjust. In the age boundaries specifically, the turmoil it took us to get to the calendar year and then moving back again in the time frame that we are in, probably the question they're asking is, do we really want to put people through that again? There's absolutely no question that it doesn't make any difference, that it would be better for exactly the reasons you state about people wanting to play with their friends. It's killed 3 age groups in youth soccer, the 14s in the fall and the 18s and the 19s in the spring. It's killed. So there are clearly advantages for having a calendar, a school year versus the calendar year to form the player pools. It's like anything else, whoever the sheriff is gets to make decisions, and sometimes the sheriff doesn't ask the right questions and comes up with the wrong answer, and then it's difficult to change back again, and that's probably the best thing to say about this. And by the way, you look a lot like Phil Neville from here.
I'll say that. So Tom, just a suggestion, when it goes to try, if they want to try to change it again, if they just changed it with the young kids, so for example, the U9s coming into the fall,
yeah,
that might be a way of doing it. But because we changed it at Worcester with the recreation, and we went to grades,
yeah,
first and second. The amount of kids that came out was unbelievable.
Oh, no question. There's no question. It was of the 100 things you could do in youth soccer to improve youth soccer, that would have been 106.
Right.
It just that no one in our worlds could see any advantage to go to calendar years, and to this day, no one still does. And I think I want to say all of the people who were responsible for that decision are just out of the federation at this point.
Okay. Good.
It's that they're not short of people chirping in their ears telling them why that was a problem. Let's just put it that way.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Tom.
Any other questions from the group?
Yeah, Brad, I have one.
Going a totally different direction here. As we talk through, and I really appreciate all of the positioning. So, I mean, since we're dealing with youth soccer here, I think one of the things I've struggled with the most is where to strategically position the kids that are maybe the weakest links on the team, not only just to mitigate risk, but also to set them up for the most success.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there is a way, particularly with the smaller numbers of players, that you can totally do that, particularly if, and a lot's going to depend on the style of play that you choose. So in other words, if the way your team is playing tends to be more vertical, where the team plays less with the ball and more without the ball, then obviously that player is not going to be put in a spot where either their skill, their decision making, or physical ability maybe gets highlighted as much. That being said, I think the challenge is that with younger ages is, what are you saying if we try and hide them? And one of the things that I've learned in just being back here, working with the youth level as opposed to the collegiate level, is the number of times I've watched a U12 player, a U13 player, and looked at them and thought, hey, I don't know what's going to happen here. But if you're patient, if you give those players opportunities, we really don't know what it's going to look like. And I think what comes at the front end of that in your statement is maybe a concern of result. And I don't want to say results are a negative thing. They're not. They're important. But at the end of the day, it's up to us as the coaches to be able to put results in context. We play to win, but never at the expense of developing the players, particularly at these ages. And so there's obviously, you deal with the individual player. You can also have you're dealing with the team here, and so how you manage and discuss with your team results in the context of results. You're talking with the parents about the development of the group and the individuals, not at the expense of a player, because no matter what you're in, whether it's a U10 team, whether it's your job at work, somebody is a top performer and somebody's a bottom performer. And I don't think we're at these ages, and I don't think you're implying this, but we're going to cast off, I was small, a late developer. I'm glad I had an opportunity. And I think if you go all the way back up to the surveys, kids learn and enjoy more by participating. And so I think that's an important piece. Here's another thing that came out of that research too, along those lines. And I don't know if it directly ties in with your question. Kids enjoy playing games, even if they lose, provided the games are competitive. They will find more enjoyment, and that'll be statistically defined with data. There'll be more enjoyment losing 4-3 than winning 10-0. And so that's another piece of the puzzle to keep in mind when you're dealing with your parents, is discussing that this is part of the process.
Brad,
I hope I hit at the heart of it.
Brad, so at North Olmsted, we have 2 teams per age group. So we'll have like an upper team and a lower team. And then we'll have say that we have 18 kids in the age group between like the 2009s. We'll have our top 6 kids play on the A team at the whole time. We'll have our middle 6 guest in between the A team and the B team. And then we'll have the lower 6. And then on the B team, we'll have those 6. And then we'll guest up the A players from the younger age group to give them a different experience playing up a grade. And at a lower level where they can compete, where physicality may be a little difficult because, again, kids grow at different rates. But it's just giving them, and that's an advantage of us having as many teams as we do. It just gives them different opportunities to play at different levels with different kids who eventually they'll all play with in high school.
And that talks a little bit about coaching in pools. It's a very challenging thing, but it's also a good thing for development when you can have a clear movement of players based on their particular needs. It's a really good thing, but that also jumps into, a coach or an organization's ability and how much they're working on the environment as a whole. And the environment primarily is the parent environment, because that requires parent education, consistent communication, and putting development as the forefront of what you're doing, and being consistent with that messaging. If you lose the messaging and you're doing pool play with younger ages, and any age for that matter, if the messaging isn't consistent and you're not staying true to the player development piece of it, you run into challenges. Other thoughts? Good questions, good feedback. All right, Tom, you wanted to say a few words here before we wrap up?
First of all, well done. That was really good. Excellent. I don't know if you were going to finish off slide 26, but just the piece that becomes important for us developmentally is taking the idea behind slide 25, which is slide. I go to slide 25, Brad. Yeah, in each match situation, everybody's got a job, and if you go to slide 26. The only difference between what we do in five-a-side is complicated by putting more players on the field. So part of our learning curve is taking the idea that, okay, in five-a-side, I've only got 4 players to organize. If I go to six-a-side, I got 5 to organize. I go to seven-a-side, I got 6 field players to organize. And just depending on the number, it's the same concept. In match situations, and if we start with the goalkeepers, it's the clearest situation. What am I asking each player to do? What's their responsibility in the game? And that may be the biggest challenge as we look at our collective understanding of soccer, is that it doesn't look very organized because we probably don't spend as much time in practice helping players understand the game in a way that they can transfer what we do in practice to what they see in the game. So you find a lot of coaches saying, who's doing what? Whose job is that? Who's supposed to be there? And I think Brad said that earlier. Part of our jobs and our challenges is to get more comfortable coaching in game situations so that the who has a name to it and a position attached to it. And at that point, I think it becomes clearer for the players.
Excellent. So at this point, we're at time. We're at 5:23, so we went a little bit over. Appreciate everybody for taking the time to join. It's kind of a breath of fresh air to have people from different organizations, different parts of the state to join in and to discuss. Thanks for contributing, because that's really what makes this good. I don't certainly probably talk more than I really wanted to. I'd like to hear from your experiences as well, because there's some great experience on the call. Upcoming, we have Amanda Visick, who helped guided the fun maps. Coming up on Ohio North, you can check our webpage for the upcoming presentations. Brad Friedel following that, which will be interesting to hear. So hopefully we'll see a lot of you on these calls. My contact information is at the very tail end of this. If you have questions or anything like that, feel free to reach out. It was great to connect with some of you again. Be safe, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you on a call again soon. Thanks for joining.
Cheers, Brad.
Thank you, Brad.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Brad.
Yep.
Corey, would I be able to text you a question pertaining to me?
Wave to Coach Beth. She's on
Yeah,
there.
absolutely. Text, call.
Coach
Yeah,
Beth
whatever you need.
is somewhere. Wave to Coach Beth. She's on there somewhere.
Where?
She was.
All right, I'll send you a message, Brad. Thanks.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah.
Is this the new Man United fans?
Yeah, this is Preston and this is Sierra.
Hello. Who's your favourite players?
Rashford.
Rashford? Yeah, okay,
Nice.
you look like him.
That's
You got the
awesome.
same haircut. You're looking as well.
That's fantastic.
Are you
Oh, my
missing the
goodness.
oh, he's gone.
Well, hold on. So can you sing the Solskjaer song? This is right. Go on, can you see it? Go on.
No, the other one.
What's Glory, Glory, Man United? What's the Ollie Gully Solskjaer one? Who put the?
Put in a ball in a drum with me. Put in a ball in a drum with me. Put in a ball. We got a ball. Hi. Who put the ball in the German net? Who put the ball in the German net? Who put the ball in the German net? All we got is our shot.
That's for Herbie.
Hey, European Cup final.
Oh
All
my
right,
God,
guys,
that's
take care.
fantastic.
Yeah.
All right.
Good meeting
Thanks
you,
for
kids.
joining.
Take care. Bye. Bye, mate. Bye. Bye.
Oh,
Who's
all
GF,
right.
who's GFS 5?
JFS5. I don't know who that is.
Well, that was good.
Hopefully.
Yep,
Uh,
you left plenty of time for the piece at the end. You had about half an hour or something like that, and then that got into that. That was good.
Yeah, I'm gonna. Yeah.
The
So
cold calling was nice because people don't want to respond on